And there's two sides to every coin. Then there's a conversation you can join. But I'm an old dog and there's new tricks. And some of my opinions you just can't fix. 'Cause I'm an old man yelling at the sky. I'ma shake my fist at the clouds and cry. Get off my lawn, you snowflake, before I have a meltdown, breakdown, shakedown. 'Cause this is my hometown, so back down, sports clown. It's all just a game, and it's the last down, let down, cowtown. I said it's all just a game. I give the touchdown, the rundown, the lowdown. 'Cause it's over the game, gonna crack down and shut down, it's sundown. I said it's all just a game.
Say, kids, how the hell are you? Good to see you. I am me and you are you. Thanks for joining us today on Just a Game. I'm really actually kind of jazzed about today's show. We have been rather hockey heavy for a while, not to say we won't be talking about the greatest game in the whole world, but we'll be talking about some baseball today and some other things. Actually, one of my true passions, which is sports media and the business of sport. Because I think there's a lot of really important things going on there. Having said all of that, welcome to the show. We are broadcasting live from Treaty 7 Nation. And as well, this is an inclusive program. Everybody is welcome here. A lot of craziness in the world right now. We are seeing it in our own province. So for those who may be finding this podcast for the first time or who are listening from Northern Alberta who are impacted by the fires and everything that's going on up there. Of course, we're thinking about you, and hopefully we can do things to help you. This is a great time for us to rally around our neighbors and our province. I will say this. I'm getting a wee bit ticked off with the Tinfoil Hat Brigade. You guys can get the hell out of Dodge now. You didn't serve any purpose a year ago. You didn't serve any purpose during COVID, and you haven't served any purpose for the last 20 or 30 years. So take your little conspiracy theories and dawdle on home, because you're useless. Anyway, that's how I'm going to choose to start today's program. Speaking of useless, my predictions. Getting into round number 2, it looked like Toronto, who slayed a dragon, got a monkey off its back by beating Tampa in 6 games. It just looked to me like they were going to, take off, right? Edmonton, who at times just look like they're on a completely different plane than everybody. But here we are, starting tonight. The two Canadian teams are in action, and both are trailing in their series. Don't think Toronto's coming back against the Florida Panthers. The Panthers have won 6 in a row, look like they're pushing all the right buttons. Edmonton, on the other hand, they're at home tonight. They can go off just as easily for 5 or 6 goals again. I just, after that whole series against LA and the position they were put in the one game where they were down 3-0 after the first, I just think they're an uberly confident team. And quite honestly, I think, at least on the West, still, regardless, until they lose, I still think they're the best team in the West. But let's just all establish that my predictions, my ability to foretell the future, completely useless. Elsewhere, Carolina's going to roll on Jersey. That one, had a little hiccup, an 8-4 loss on the weekend, but last night 6-1, just blew it open in the second period. There is no more goaltending miracle in Jersey. Carolina, despite missing a team's worth, or at least a lineup's worth of stars, no Max Pacioretty, et cetera, still find a way. And we are living in the golden age of analytics, are we not? We are absolutely living in the golden age of statistics and data. because not in a month of Sundays would I give it a tinker's darn about Jordan Martinook and his very quiet first round. But Lord help us all. There's Martinook, who's now, I believe, either tied or set the new NHL mark for being shut out in the first round and point production in the second, or shut out in a previous round and point production in the next. So you got some terrific storylines. Meanwhile, the local hockey heroes, not a lot to talk about that hasn't been talked about, I think. Toffoli, Lucic, and Uyghur are wearing letters. Toffoli, the captain for Canada over at the NIT tournament, or if you will, the World Hockey Championships. So hopefully that draws a little attention. Who doesn't like morning hockey? I got to be honest with you. Who doesn't like getting up at 9:30 and watching hockey? It's the best. So we'll be watching that for the next couple of weeks. Not a whole lot to report on the search for a general manager. Elliot Friedman, Chris Johnston, Frank Seravalli, the insiders, if you will, all pointing to the same thing. Interviews are taking place as we speak. I have no reason to think that the two internal candidates, Craig Conroy and Brad Pascal, aren't at the top of the list. Nothing to indicate that, but we shall see. And then I guess locally, some playoff action that we should talk about as we head into the weekend. The Wranglers will host Coachella Valley in a best of 5, games 1 and 2 here on Thursday and Friday in the city. I hope that we get a lot of people out for that. And the Roughnecks, speaking of Thursday, they play our good friend, Andrew McBride. Remember, McBride was in the studio from the Colorado Mammoth. So was, I guess in fairness, so was Mike Board, the general manager of the Roughnecks. So we got friends on both sides of this. But anyway, I believe it's in Denver on Thursday and then in Calgary on Saturday, and then they'll play again next week if it goes beyond. It's a best of 3. So we do have weekend lacrosse here. It's a busy time in the old building. And I mean the old building. No news there either, as we are stuck here in the middle of an election with the building kind of, nobody wants to say it, but kind of hanging in the balance here. I still think it's, if the other side gets in or whatever, however we're, the lefties, the righties, whatever we're talking about, the UCP, the NDP, the UCP's idea, the NDP get in, do they scrub it? Do we get a building? Who knows? My optimism is fair to middling. I'll go with fair to middling. But we've already, in fairness, we have already established in the brief period that this program has been on the air that my predictions are useless. So let's continue on with that. We are live today in the Oodle Noodle studio. We're not just crazy about noodles. We put the same energy back into the community. 2 locations, 1244 17th Avenue Southwest. And if you're in Airdrie, 105 Main Street North, pickup and delivery. I really was excited because we had our next guest on real early in the start of this show, and it was a lot of fun. He gets to talk passionately about one of the things that I like, which is the business of sport and media and the intersection and the future, really, the innovation and things that happen. So we are courtesy of the Ski Cellar Snowboard, skicellarsnowboard.com. 76 years in Calgary, 3 locations: McLeod Trail by Chinook Center, 17th Avenue Southwest, just off of 14th Street, Bow Ridge Road Northwest, by the McDonald's, just down from Winsport. Very excited. From Playmaker Capital, sports media analyst Adam Seaborn was kind enough to make some time for us again here today. Adam, a pleasure to have you back. How are you, sir?
I'm good, Rob. How are you doing?
I am good, but I'm out west and I'm south of where all the action is. I think you're right smack dab in the middle of where everything's going on right now. Tell me a little bit about the Toronto Maple Leafs story in context of the world and the people that you interact with.
Yeah, well, listen, it's a game day here in Toronto. Despite the Oilers jersey behind me, I'm plumply here in our Toronto office in Midtown. It's a game day in Toronto. I think a lot of people are expecting this might be the last game day for a while. It's amazing. I was looking, one of our other shows in our network, and Rob, we should say that, Playmaker is the parent company of Just a Game, Flames Nation, and
yep.
In our Toronto network, the Leafs Nation, we have a morning show with Jay Rosehill and Nick Alberga. Fantastic stuff for Leaf fans to check out, called Leafs Morning Take. And on May, I think 3rd, we had a great show, and the clip for that show on YouTube was, "Are the Maple Leafs primed for a deep run in the playoffs? Are they going to the Cup final?" That was the title of the show. 2 days ago, we have what happened to the Maple Leafs. They've collapsed in historic fashion again. So it's amazing how quick the narrative can turn here in Toronto. I blame no one but the team. There's a little bit of back and forth with Mitch Marner in the media yesterday, saying he doesn't listen to the negative stories the media talk about. Yeah. Probably outing himself as someone who does listen to what's going on in the media. But I think the mood here in Toronto was, nerves going into the first round. A lot of people in the city of Toronto did not pay attention to the regular season. I mean, the reality is that anecdotally, I know from season ticket holders, I know from people who generally were going down to the rink all the time, there was a real, lack of excitement about the team during the regular season because they were good. Everyone knew they were good. Yep. No one cared about, anyone getting individual records. People were just like, show me what you can do in the playoffs. And by January, it was obvious they were going to play Tampa. Tampa or Boston for a bit, but it was pretty certain one of those two teams with the new format. And then they end up, getting locked into the Tampa series. Okay, rematch with Tampa, great opportunity. And to everyone's surprise, they win in 6. Yep. Amazingly, they monkey off the back. City was elated. It wasn't quite 2019 Raptors championship level excitement downtown, but it was, streets packed, cars honking, bars full. Like it was as busy a Saturday night as I can remember in Leafland. And here we are, less than 2 weeks later, and people have written the team off. So the emotions have swung dramatically, and expectations, are pretty low, I think, at this point. I think people have written them off. If they can make a series out of this, if they can come back here in Game 7, I think, again, all bets are off. You're going to see another giant roller coaster swing for the Leafs. But it's been, a pretty exciting spring that we haven't had in Toronto in a long time.
Let's talk about the business of this, though. What does that do to rights holders? What does that do to ancillary media companies? I mean, just the fact the Leafs being in is a boon for the media industry in this country. So what are we talking about in terms of the financial impact of this team?
Yeah, I think a lot of people in Western Canada are sick of hearing about the Leafs. TSN, the Toronto Sports Network, as people like to call it, Sportsnet covers the Leafs, with a fine-tooth comb, and they probably don't do a good enough job covering other markets. But the reason they do that is that, one, the population of the country is such that if you scrape out Quebec, English-speaking Canada, more than half of it lives in the Maple Leaf region, right? Yep. Within a couple hundred kilometers downtown Toronto, that Golden Horseshoe area. Yep. And it's the straw that stirs the drink in terms of revenue, right? So if you go out there and you are a, media company, let's say Sportsnet, for example, and you pay a boatload of money, maybe $5.5 billion or so for the rights to the broadcast games, you're doing that with the expectation that a team like Toronto, Montreal, Vancouver, Calgary, one of the Canadian teams, but really Toronto is going to make a deep run. And I saw you guys just flash that, that tweet that I had on the board. The reason why it's so important is that the audience that watched the Toronto game is just frankly about double the size of what you're going to get anywhere else in English Canada. Quebec's different, but you got to split the rights with TVA there, and you get half people watching English, half people watching French. So there's a little bit of fragmentation. With Toronto, if you're Sportsnet, you own the whole thing, and every night you're getting double the audience you're going to get from any other Canadian team, which means double the ad revenue. But not just double the ad revenue, it's double the kind of excitement from big brands. The reality is that most big companies in Canada are headquartered in Toronto. There's a chance that you go into a boardroom of any big company in Canada, one person on the board of directors, one person in the C-suite, they are Toronto Maple Leaf fans. They're going to be down at the rink for a Leaf game. It's very easy to sell them a multi-million-dollar advertising package. So from an economic standpoint, deals like this are critical when you sign rights agreements, right? Every single broadcaster in Canada, the US, you sign on hoping that you're going to get an opportunity to leverage those rights and make a little bit of money on it. And, Rogers' calculus was that if we get these rights and we get a Maple Leaf run, we're going to be able to leverage that into a big revenue opportunity. And they have not gotten it. And we're getting to the tail end of that deal. That deal started in 2014. It was, if you can't believe it, it feels like just yesterday that deal happened and it shook around the world. But we're getting into the back third of that deal. And yet again, they don't have a Leaf series. So, the number one thing is making sure series go long. 7 games is always better than 4. But having big markets like the Leaf in there are huge. So we're talking, to give like raw numbers on it, multi-million dollars in additional ad revenue every single additional Leaf game that happens, like net new revenue coming in. And that's just for the broadcaster, which, listen, I don't think a lot of people care too much how much money the broadcaster is making. The economic impact on the city is real as well. You have tourism, you have bars and restaurants, you have just general kind of excitement in the city around the Leafs. And I think that economic impact can be hard to measure the same way you can measure ad revenue, but it is important.
What's the ancillary effect on, I don't know, the hockey market, I guess. And by that, I'm beginning to think I understand this a little bit more, that if there's a hangover in Toronto, if there's a hangover on Bay Street, that could impact other Canadian teams, right?
The hangover spreads across the country. So not only are most of the headquarters of the big brands that spend a lot of money on sports advertising in Canada, most of the big ad agencies are in Toronto as well. Most big publishing companies are in Toronto as well. And,
Yeah.
if you spend a lot of money against sports, maybe against the Maple Leafs over the last few years, and it keeps being, your brand is being tied to moments of disappointment. Your brand is lining up for something that never executes. There's going to be kind of a strategic thinking that maybe sports media and sports marketing isn't that good an investment for us. Maybe our bank, or maybe our food delivery company, or maybe our whatever doesn't need to align ourselves with sports. Maybe there's other areas within the culture that are better fit. And all of a sudden ad dollars from Calgary or from Vancouver or Edmonton start going away just because the hangover in Toronto is spilled. So I think that's an acute point, Rob, that Toronto agenda for the rest of the country.
What are we in while we're having this conversation, let's talk a little bit about who is buying ads nowadays. Who's still buying traditional? Now, in fairness to Rogers and Bell, they're not necessarily selling only traditional ads. They're into the digital market as well. But who's buying the ads, and what ads are being bought at the biggest rates right now?
Yeah. So right now, okay, if you look at the Canadian ad market, right? So forget sports for a second. Just think about advertising. About $1 in $3 spent on advertising in Canada still goes into television. That's a high percentage. Television does not have the same reach that digital has. If you just look at Google and Amazon and Facebook, who are the three largest advertising companies in the world, and they eat up a high majority of the digital ad market. TV gets its unfair share, I would say, of ad dollars in the country, given its current reach and how little reach it has compared to what it used to have. It still has lots of reach. Don't get me wrong. TV reaches a lot of people. We all watch news and we all watch sports, but not nearly the same amount it used to. The people who are buying ads are the same people who've been buying ads for quite a long time against sports. If we look sports specifically, there's a very good chance you're trying to target a young male demo. So you're going to see the same kind of three categories that you've seen since the history of advertising. You're going to see automotive. People wanted to get you to buy your first truck or your first car. You'll see Ford, Chevrolet, Honda, Hyundai, you name it. And those auto dealers, they think in terms of like a customer life cycle. So a lot of people think advertising, and they think like, come down to the store, $9.99, 2-for-1 sale. It's a BOGO, stuff like that. That is a part of advertising. That's that performance piece. But the sports and television really relies on brand advertising, and brand advertising rarely has a metric of performance tied to it. You're not saying, well, I ran $10 million of Ford ads, and did I move $10 million worth of Ford cars? You're thinking that if I can get a 22-year-old or a 27-year-old or a 30-year-old, if I can get their first car to be a Ford F-150, then I've got a customer for life. And now they're in my CRM, my customer database. Yep. Now when they have a family and they need to buy a minivan, are they going to look to us or one of our cars? Now when they get older and they have children, are they going to buy their kid, their first car might be a Ford, or get them involved? They're going to become a customer for life. And banks are the exact same. So you're going to see auto, you're going to see banks as well. If I can get someone's first credit card, or their first checking account, or their first mortgage, there's a very good chance that is a customer for life. How often do people move from one of the 5 big banks? Right. I mean, again, banks and automotive, in a lot of ways, they're kind of commodities. People who are into cars are going to disagree with me, but if you go into the same class of vehicle, is there a big difference between a Toyota Tundra and a Ford F-150 and a Chevy Tahoe? I have no idea. I'm not a truck person, but to me, they're all about the same price. You're going to have the same APR financing, whatever, with all those brands. Same is true with Scotiabank or CIBC or TD. I mean, the banking products are roughly the same with all of them. So it's a game of getting people into the ecosystem and knowing that you might have a customer for life. And sports are an amazing way to spend that kind of money. I've been with TD since I was a child because my parents were with TD. And when I was like 12 years old, they opened me up a kid's checking account. And that's the same account I've had my entire life. And guess what? When I had a mortgage, it went with them as well. So that kind of long tail brand marketing, those are the people that are spending big money on sports, right? So right now on sports TV, you're going to see those two categories. The last one's QSRs, and they are much more focused on the next meal up. So QSRs, quick serve restaurants. Think about stuff like McDonald's, Tim Hortons, Wendy's, Burger King, Harvey's. You'll see every single one of the brands I just named in tonight's Oilers game and tonight's Leaf game. Every one of those brands is going to be running an ad. I promise you that. Pizza 73. You're going to see all of those as well. They're much more focused on the today and now, but their core demo is like a young, predominantly male purchaser. That's who wants to get against sports.
So, but do those same rules apply across the board, or is that television? And what, if not, what's digital advertising showing us about sports?
That is television, and it for the most part it does carry to other channels. But when you get into the digital space, look at things like podcast, digital video, social. That's where the base of advertiser gets a lot more broad, and no one category really owns the market the same way. I'll encourage everyone who's listening right now, when you watch the Oilers game or the Leaf game or whatever game you're watching tonight, in every ad break, just watch it and see if you can count. I bet you're going to be able to count a quick serve restaurant, and a financial service, an automotive, and probably a sports betting operator. Those are probably the 4 or 5 maybe categories you're going to see in every single ad break. You can experience the internet and not see any of those brands at all. Because the internet's so much more democratized. You're also going to see a lot more new brands venture into new mediums. Podcasting is still really in its infancy as a medium from an ad market perspective. People who listen to this on different programs are going to see, obviously ads that we have baked into the show, local ads that support you, like Oodle Noodle and the Ski Cellar Snowboard. But you're going to also see things like Athletic Greens. You're going to see things like BetterHelp. You're going to see things like Peloton. These direct to consumer, Casper Mattress or Cozy and brands like that. You're going to see those kind of newer age digital first brands that probably don't have the budgets for television, but also they are focused on that performance, focused on a younger consumer. So they're really who's playing in the digital space.
So it was only a couple of years ago. And I know the last time you visited, we briefly talked about, the impact that the gambling has had, especially on sports. But the one we didn't talk about, and nobody seems to talk about now, how big a void has crypto left in the advertising world? Because for a while there, it was, a huge player, right?
Listen, I think there was a time where between FTX and Crypto.com, you could not find a sport that one of the two of them wasn't involved in, right? FTX, which now is hilarious to think if you've read the news on what's happened with FTX over the last year, they were on every single Major League Baseball umpire sleeve, right? Before they were even regulated in most of those markets, they were never regulated in Canada. They were on there. You had Crypto.com Arena. It's still Crypto.com Arena out in LA. You had FTX in Miami. They peeled the name off it, but they don't have a new name in Miami, I don't think yet. So crypto was this big boom of opportunity. The Super Bowl, not last year, but the year before, had something like 7 different crypto ads, each paying between $5 and $7 million for their advertising time. This last year, there was none. So that was a pretty big flash in the pan. I can't really remember the last time that a category like that showed up and then disappeared. The only maybe, comparison that people have brought up is the 2000.com bubble, where every single brand decided that all of a sudden they were whatever brand.com. Williams Sonoma was Pets.com, WilliamsSonoma.com. And then also there was, Enron was historically a big one where they were naming the ballpark in Houston, and that was short-lived when Enron blew up. But that was more fraud than a category exploded. So yeah, crypto's left a pretty big hole, to be honest, in the sports marketing. But when I think about the entire ad market, so in Canada, just looking like March over March, TV's down, radio's down, newspapers down, digital's up, digital video's up, out of home's up, out of home being like billboards and stuff, but that's up kind of artificially because it was so far down during the pandemic. There was no out of home being spent. So maybe, net, it's maybe about flat. But that's for the entire ad market. If you look at sports is up and to the right. Because in our culture, sports is the only thing now, maybe not the only thing, but one of very few things that are really a monoculture. The biggest, entertainment television program 30, 40 years ago would reach 20, 30, 40 million households a night in the U.S. There's nothing that reaches even close to that now in the U.S. There is no single show, even if you think of, House of the Dragon, which was the new Game of Thrones show on HBO. You think about a lot of people watch that new show, The Last of Us. People are watching shows like Succession or shows like Yellowstone. Those are all fractions of what old television shows used to do from a reach perspective. Yeah. But sports is still hitting records. You saw the NBA hit a 25-year record where Steph Curry put up 50 in the first round. You've seen the NHL hit records in the US this year with TNT and ESPN. In Canada, we're not quite record hitting with the NHL, but we're certainly like up on par with any NHL ratings that have existed over the last 20 years. So sports is still hitting the same amount of viewers that it's always hit, and everything else is down. So on a relative basis, sports is even more valuable than it used to be. So you can start charging a premium for that advertising time, a premium for partnerships. And we've gotten a lot better, and by we, I mean the sports media industry, at monetizing sports. Go back again 30 years, rink boards, digital rink boards. I know a lot of people hate the digital rink boards. They are a yield increase for the NHL. There are now jersey patches. There are helmet patches. You go into, I was at an NFL game last year, and not a single moment of the in-arena experience was not brought to you by a brand of some kind. From a halftime shot to a seventh inning stretch to when Stompin' Tom Connors comes out at the ACC or the Scotiabank Arena, you're going to get an ad on either side of that. And you're going to have the official food delivery and the official this and that. Every single category has been sold through in sports in a way that it wasn't 30 years ago. Not because... Listen, I'm not going to give sports owners and leagues, let them off the hook necessarily. I think there are cases where it is pretty pervasive and maybe not good for the fan experience. Yep. But the reality is that they're getting demand. They're having people knock on their door and say, I want to be involved with the Calgary Flames. What can I do to be the official whatever of the Flames? And these are for-profit businesses. They've done a good job monetizing it, and these ad dollars have to go somewhere. If you're an auto company, you got to advertise somewhere, and if there's no more entertainment to advertise in, and the music radio station doesn't carry the same weight that it used to in the market, and nobody's reading the newspaper, or maybe there isn't even a newspaper in your market anymore, where else can you go? Well, if there is an NHL team in Winnipeg, I can sponsor that. So the ad dollars have continued to go up in sports, and I don't see it slowing down.
Well, you kind of touched on it. I was going to ask about saturation, because I think you get to a point where, you can go to a game and come back and nothing, something needs to cut through, right? And is saturation and a situation like this not the leader to innovation? That somebody's going to come up with something that has to be unique, that has to grab your attention, because there is too much.
There absolutely is. I think what it's challenged advertisers do when it comes to sport is getting a lot more focused in on niches, as opposed to being able to do what, it used to be not that difficult to do a media plan for a big brand in Canada. You could say, okay, I'm going to buy, Hockey Night Canada ads. I'm going to buy some, national newspaper with the Star, the Post, and the Sun. Done. I'm going to buy, the top 3 radio stations in every market. Problem solved. You can't do that now, and the saturation around sport is definitely a factor for you. It's really hard to get exclusivity the same way you used to, unless you're baked in. If you're a new brand coming in, you're not going to get a category exclusivity or own a whole segment. So you have to get into these micro sport or micro influencers, as people call them. So, look at how much money is going into pickleball. If people haven't looked into it, there's a professional pickleball circuit now, and it's sponsored. It's totally sponsored. I think brought to you. Carvana is really heavily involved in a car delivery company in the U.S. There are celebrity owners of these teams. There's a micro kind of audience for that. You've seen the same thing with golf has been growing. There's a lot more sponsorship in golf now. Small creators in big sports, I'll use this show, Rob, as an example. This is not a show that reaches tens of millions of people every week.
Sure doesn't.
But it reaches a very core group of people who are homogenous. They are easy for an advertiser to understand. These are men predominantly. They're not all men, but it is a male skew when it comes to sports. It is, people who are probably local. If they're listening to your show, probably local to Calgary, or maybe local to Edmonton, or maybe they're expats who tune in. They want us to know what's going on, but they're likely local, and they're interested in sport, right? So you have already 3 really big narrowing down for an advertiser. It's going to be a lot more cost effective to run some advertising and be a sponsor of a show like this or another podcast out there than it is to try to find this audience elsewhere. So advertisers have gotten into this more micro targeting in terms of their ad spend, which is actually really democratized the media for a lot of people, where no longer do you need to have the masthead name of a big publisher, a big radio station in order to get attention from fans. That's fantastic. That's easy, but also get attention from advertisers. Because at the end of the day, the advertisers were never buying it because it said the New York Times at the top or because it said TSN on the masthead. They were buying it because TSN meant that you had a male audience. Well, if the male audience is elsewhere, I'll buy it elsewhere. I don't really give a crap about who's publishing it.
Yep. Let's talk a little bit about static advertising in sports. As you know, we're going down the path of finally getting a building here in Calgary. Is naming rights, where's the, because that's one that, naming rights is not an everyday thing, right? It only comes up every once in a while. The last time we heard about naming rights was a pretty significant deal, I believe, in Toronto, with the renaming of the building there.
Very significant deal. At the time, the largest deal in pro sport, I think globally, if not in North America. So yeah, I believe, I don't want to talk out of school, but I believe it's a $40 million a year deal for 10 years. I believe it's a $400 million deal.
Yeah.
Now there's probably a little bit of moving around there with Scotiabank, because there's probably some corporate banking elements with MLSE, where MLSE's got a lot of corporate banking needs. I'm sure Scotiabank is now their corporate bank. There's probably some savings there. There's probably some advertising changing hands because MLSE is owned by Rogers and Bell. So that $40 million might not really be a purely for the naming rights. There may be some other considerations in there. I'm not privy to that deal. But yes, listen, naming rights. Okay, to me, Rob, if I was advising a brand, and there's a number of agencies that do this globally, people like Oakview Group or IMG, and some groups here in Toronto, Cimarroni. If I was them, I would say that naming the new building in Calgary is the best investment you could make for your brand if you're planning to be investing in sport. And I think that if you are, again, any automotive company, if you're any bank, if you're an insurance company, or if you're like a brand that's maybe not in that traditional space, but you want to make a name for yourself, this could be one of the easiest checks to sign, because you're going to get all the paid media elements and all the great data that you get from owning a building. They're going to share with you who comes to that building. Every time someone comes to that building, gets a ticket, your brand's associated with it. You're going to be associated with concerts and hopefully Stanley Cup championships and a number of things like that. There's that whole element to it. But there's also as I talked about earlier, you are now the name of really the only meeting place that people have in a modern Canada in a way that they didn't have in the past. Go back 50 years. We were a more secular society. People would, gather in churches and communities more. To me, sport in the arena has replaced that community gathering for a lot of people. When you are someone new who moves to Calgary, the way to get indoctrinated into Calgary's community is to go to a Flames game, become a Flames fan. And you go to a store, you're going to see a Flames jersey hanging in the back window. That is like the real cultural touchstone of the city now, in a way that, again, it wasn't. Yes, the Flames were huge, 30 years ago, but they were also kind of on a hierarchy of other things that were important. Yep. Now I think that sport, and in Canada, the NHL and hockey, and the Blue Jays to an extent, and in Toronto, the Blue Jays have that feel, and in certain parts of Toronto, the Raptors as well. Yep. But I would say that in most of Canada, the NHL team in your market is the cultural touchstone that everyone can kind of agree on. It is the place that you gather, and it is an opportunity for kind of a shared experience. And if I was a brand advertiser and I'm trying to reach people, that is a no-brainer place to be associated with. You can't buy the naming rights to the church, but you can buy the naming rights to the next best thing.
I'm not asking you for a dollar figure, but so if that being the case, are we talking about something that's, closer to seven figures than it is to six figures?
Definitely. Yeah. This is a 7-figure plus deal, multi-year deal. If I was, Calgary and I was the Flames ownership group, I would be looking for the best case scenario to me is at least a 10-year term. Okay. It's going to be a new building. It's going to take time to break in. And we know that it takes a while for people to get accustomed to new names. Sometimes the new name never catches on, and that I think is also a consideration. You got to be careful with how you go about naming. There was a lot of uproar when the Gardens shut down in Toronto and it became the Air Canada Centre. Yeah. I actually think the Air Canada Centre is a fantastic name. The ACC was a great acronym. People still call it the ACC by accident. Scotiabank Arena, SBA, has not caught on, but it's a 10-year deal. It slowly will. Okay. Skydome, people still call it Skydome. Exactly, it has not been Skydome for 10 plus years, right? I think what they've done in Boston, which was smart, is when they named the Garden the TD Garden, they kept that Garden acronym or that Garden suffix in there. So people still refer to it as the TD Garden. The old Montreal Forum, Le Centre Bell. I don't know how that one's gone. I think that's probably a bit of a win. Bell is, headquartered in Montreal. It's a real Canadian company. It's a Montreal company. I think that is important too. So, best case scenario for the Flames is something that feels authentic to Calgary, feels authentic to the Flames, someone who we know is supporting sport. I would look, beer, automotive, financial. And then ideally for the brand, you're looking for, I'd say, a long-term deal, 10 plus years. And I think you'd be lucky to get away with paying just 7 figures a year. I mean, mid 7 figures, I think, is what you should be paying for such a important part of it. Now, there might be, there's a lot of production elements that go into it too, right? I remember when the Air Canada Centre was getting renamed to Scotiabank Arena, talking to someone in the know about that. And they said, just go down there and look at the signage. And everywhere from Union Station in Toronto, walking into the Air Canada Centre, there was tens of thousands of little Air Canada logos everywhere and signage, and every single seat had an Air Canada emblem on it. Changing that out into a new brand to Scotiabank was a huge project that took multiple years. When you're building a new building, you don't have to deal with changing it out, but you still need to build in these elements. You're going to have let's say it becomes the Scotiabank, barn in Calgary. Maybe it will become. You're going to have the Scotia Club there, and you're going to have the seats all named that. You maybe have the Scotia section. All of that is worth quite a bit too. And having a long-term deal so you can let those elements grow and people have a relationship with them is critical.
We were talking about saturation before within the game. And I remember going to the Staples Center when it first opened. And one of the, I guess, things about the Staples Center is they limited it to something like 10 advertisers total, right? Exclusivity. Is there an opportunity here for the Flames to kind of take a page out of that book rather than, making it a NASCAR saying, hey, if you want in, right?
Listen, I think it would behoove them to try to do that. I think sometimes the owners see dollar signs, and it's hard to turn away money.
Sure,
and
it is.
It's a for-profit business. You're telling me like, hey, we're not in the business of turning away advertisers. I'll tell you that in Toronto, MLSE is never in the business of turning away someone. If you've got money, whether you're the Dairy Farmers of Ontario or your Uber or your Scotiabank, we will find a place for you within our marketing mix and within our asset list. We'll find a new category for you. We'll find something for you to sponsor. But I think your Staples Center example is a good one. I do think that something is lost when you have, I think having different brands is not a problem. I think despite what people say, and this is philosophically, a lot of people claim that they hate advertising, that they really don't like advertising, that it's distracting. And I'm not here to disagree with people on that. I do think that at times advertising is bad, but I don't think all advertising is bad. I think bad advertising is bad. I think good advertising can be good. It can actually not just be, okay, it's annoying, to actually being a value add. People right now can think of ads that they've seen that were funny on TV and that they still enjoy to this day or informative. And I think like the ad experience in arena can be an enjoyable one as long as you're not kind of taking your audience's attention for granted. I think having competing brands is a huge problem. I think if you have multiple people in one space, so multiple car companies or multiple banks or multiple insurance companies, all of a sudden it feels really, really cheap. It's like, well, what, you're going to, promoting a Scotiabank mortgage in the first period, and the second period it's TD, and the third it's RBC. This just feels like a money grab where, if maybe it is Scotiabank who does the thing and they own the whole thing, and they're like, listen, we don't want any advertising to happen in the third period because, that's the Scotiabank third period. I think that's a really good idea. And you've seen some examples of this happen in other sport. Masters is the best example. So the Masters famously is under-monetized. They do not run very many ads at all. They actually tell CBS what the ad load's going to be, which is the only golf tournament that they do that for. And they say, CBS, we want the Masters to be the most premium sports product that there is. And the way that we do that is by selling very few advertisements and by having very few partners. And the partners that they have are long-term. IBM has been a partner of the Masters forever. So has Rolex, so has Mercedes. All luxury brands, all people who spend a lot of money, but also do not hammer you with a lot of advertising. Not everyone has that luxury. Not every platform can be like that. But I think it is a very interesting balance between frequency of ads and getting that revenue and, how authentic the ad feels and really not drowning your audience's attention in.
I mean, I think they tried it here in Calgary in a unique way with the Roughnecks, with the WestJet field and going with the teal. They just put the logos in the wrong place because you don't see the logos in the highlights. Right?
Yeah.
Why is it a teal field? I have no idea. But if I see the logo, I go, oh, then it's WestJet.
Remember that. That was I thought that was actually a very innovative idea. I don't know if that was the Roughnecks or WestJet.
No, it was the Roughnecks idea.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Really, yeah.
Just put the logos in the wrong place, right? Because where do highlights from highlights from lacrosse come from? They come from the blue line in, so to speak, right?
Yeah.
And that's part of that too, right? And what you're talking about with the Masters and there's some experiential stuff to that too, right? Like they get access to some experience stuff and things like that, which is, again, how not risk adverse, but how creative do you want to be?
Yeah, I think when people think about the advertising, they often just think about the media and the reach, right? It's like, okay, well, 10 million people are going to see this. I'm going to see it. Listen, when you become a partner of a building like that, the experiential piece is as valuable as the rest. Like the 15 or 20,000 people that are going into that building, how can you like have a one-on-one relationship with them as they come in? There's actually a partnership here in Toronto that I think's been really good. Entropy, which is a custom clothing brand. No free ads here on Just a Game, but I'll give them a free shout out. Great company, Entropy. If you'd like to advertise, you can reach out to Jared about that. But they they make all of the towels. When you see those rally towels, they make those, and they might do it for other buildings in the NHL too. And they do some of the free hats that they give away in Maple Leaf Square, where they have the leaf and the milk logo. When you walk in the game, they hand you a towel or it's on your seat already, and they have these big yellow Entropy boxes, and they have a little bit of banner advertising and board advertising in the game. But it makes sense. It's tied to the game. It's like, oh, this company Entropy is who gave me this towel. This towel is an important part of the experience of being a fan at the game. I'm always left with a very positive feeling about the brand, but also I know I can know the name of that brand immediately. Whereas I am sure that there are, there's probably a whiskey brand, or there's probably a airline that is associated with the team that I have no idea about, because they're not tied into the game at all. And it just feels like another ad pitch. Yeah.
Mentioned the building. So we talked about the static advertising. One of I'm complaining because I want the building. So I want past that part. Show me, tell me. One of the suggestions that I think needs to be there is you got to build with an eye to the future. What do you see as coming down the pipe? If you were going to be advising a group on a building, what would you be, from your vantage point, your lens, what would you be advising?
I mean, on the actual building, and I'm very curious to see how the building, it seems to have all of a sudden become an election issue there.
It is an election issue, yes.
Which is always interesting when the building becomes an election issue. I think that the modern buildings are all very good at being multi-purpose, multi-space without feeling, too corporate. So I think what the Jays have done down at the Rogers Center has been a really good innovation in ballparks. Their ballpark was way behind the times in this. A lot of other ballparks around baseball are doing that. Having these kind of non-seated communal spaces is interesting. Yeah, I think that those are really good. I think that even at even in hockey arenas, you have that now. I think actually what they have in Edmonton is fantastic. Those kind of, they're not quite luxury suites.
Loges, I think they call them.
Yeah, the loges that they have, where it's like, it's not a luxury suite, but it's not quite a normal seat either. I think those are like these kind of hybrid seating arrangements are really smart. I would also have an eye towards sports betting. And I think that sports betting will be in Alberta soon. And I think you don't need to build a sports book into it, but I do think having a game related space, whether that's bars and restaurants and clubs, or having something that does have an eye on sports betting, is an interesting idea. In Toronto, Real Sport is not connected to the building. It's right across the road, and it's owned by Maple Leaf Sports and Entertainment as well. It has kind of a sports book feel to it. It has giant TVs. You can go in there. Now that gambling is legal in Ontario, you can go and place a wager on your phone and watch different games there. And it feels very tied to the rink. It's kind of an obvious, you go there pregame, you go there post-game. I think having, I think with the district in Edmonton has a similar type of feel, where they built ancillary stuff that isn't necessarily tied to the in-arena experience. There's that Wayne Gretzky Club in Edmonton as well, which I think is a good experience. So I think having these kind of, one, geared towards sports betting, but also these kind of restaurant bar type atmosphere that is not tied specifically to watching the game is an important part of a modern building. But you don't want to lose a life to the building, because I can just hear people saying, well, then it's going to be all these corporate suites. The last thing we want to do is take notes on how to build a hockey rink from Toronto. Toronto's got the worst, in-arena experience for players and fans. I don't disagree with you on that. I think there's a hybrid way to do it. I think what Edmonton has done is a really good case study on how to build a brand new building that's modern, has modern amenities, but still can feel loud and very imposing and a fun hockey atmosphere.
I get a little nervous when I hear people down here say Edmonton's nice, but it's big. Like there's too much wasted space in it. I'm one of these guys that was wondering about what AR, VR, some of these alternate reality entertainment pieces that are coming out, that if you might not want a venue in a city that has just, 10,000 open square feet to put technology into. That's kind of what I'm wondering all about.
It's an interesting conversation about how augmented reality is going to continue to change hockey. I mean, like the first example of that I've seen in Canada is when they were having the player tracking data in Edmonton on the ice and people watching just the player tracking data. I mean, I don't know. I'd love to hear from someone if you attended that or have any experience with it. Reach out to me on Twitter. I'd love to hear from you about that. But in terms of building a space that's kind of modular from that perspective, it's an interesting thing to consider. I don't know how you necessarily plan for that as you're building. You'd have to, see what else is going on around the world. But modern buildings certainly all have this modular aspect in mind in terms of being able to you don't just plug in a new event and keep the seating and the experience the same. When a new event is in there, whether it's a concert or it's a monster truck rally or it's a hockey game or a lacrosse game or a basketball game, have the ability to change the way that the seating is built in a relatively easy fashion so that you can host multiple different types of events and events that you maybe never thought of in the future. I mean, when the Air Canada Center was first built, it was built knowing that the Raptors were in town, right? Because before that, the Raptors were playing at the Sky Dome, and that was pretty bad experience. When Toronto FC started playing in Toronto, that was a small building built for MLS soccer, but it's gotten quite a bit bigger over the years. It's going to get bigger again now that it's hosting the FIFA World Cup in 2026. But that space has always been good about being modular as well. So I think modern space in Calgary is going to have to be, have the ability to be flexible, but know that your main tenant is the Flames.
I just wonder, and this is where I get a little wacky, I just wonder how far we are away from fans coming into the building and being able to step right in the middle of a significant game in Calgary Flames history and just walk right through holograms or video or whatever of Lanny McDonald, who looks like he's skating from me over to the wall, or, like literally being in the play.
It's a fascinating thing. And like, it sounds like science fiction. It sounds like the holodeck from Star Trek or something crazy. But I do think that, that is not a far-fetched plan to have in your mind. I do think that people are going to want to gather in communal spaces, but experience these kind of, three-dimensional, AR experiences. And there's some of that going on outside of sport too. Like Disney has some of these interactive 3D experiences right now. I know Marvel has some of those happening across the country in the US, like bringing them into theaters and stuff. So it's going to be curious how that works in the sports space.
To that end, I begin to wonder about when those become portable and those groups decide that they want. Right now, it's really cool to get a Marvel jersey. We'll do a jersey and we'll wear a jersey, but how long until that kind of AR stuff can get moved around and you'll get that experience in your arena for your fans? That's where I think it's, and that might be 10 years from now, Adam. I don't know, but I think you have to have that eye in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. Can't disagree with you on that.
All right. A couple business news items before I let you go, just updates. The last time we spoke, we were talking a lot about the RSN situation, particularly in the United States. Well, mostly in the United States. And part was, where are we going to go? Major League Baseball was looking at taking over. Here we are a couple months later. What have we learned about this situation?
Well, I mean, it's kind of exactly what we thought was going to happen has happened, right? So you've had disagreements with the RSNs. You've had them going bankrupt. And you have these local rights that are up in the air. So it's not just baseball, by the way. It's affecting basketball in the NHL too. So actually the Golden Knights announced, even though they're still playing hockey games, that next year they have a new regional sports network partnership because their RSN in that market is going bankrupt. It's actually not a regional sports network. They're going on to a broadcast network in Nevada. Scripps owns some broadcast channels in Nevada, and the Golden Knights will be over the air for free on broadcast. An innovative way to do it, and you're going to see, I think, a few more of those. So instead of being on a cable channel in some markets, you're going to be on local broadcast, which would be interesting.
All games?
Not all games. So they're going to have their national package still with TNT and ESPN.
Yep.
And it looks like their regional games are going to be on this Scripps Sports partnership.
Okay.
But there's also going to be a direct-to-consumer streaming piece of that as well. So that if you want to reach it on a smart TV or on your device, you can subscribe directly I believe either directly to Scripps Sports or maybe with the team. The details on this are not being announced yet, but then most of their games are going to be free over the air on a smaller broadcast channel, which is kind of unique. This is going to be an interesting way. I think Pittsburgh has a major problem on their hands. They do not have a regional sports partner lined up right now. These broadcasters are still broadcasting games, and they're kind of still doing their job through the bankruptcy, but this is not a long-term solution. So, as we speak, there are essentially a bunch of different carve-outs happening. I know that Major League Baseball and the NBA and the NHL are all monitoring each one of these regional sports deals, but I don't know if there's going to be a one-size-fits-all solution. I think you're going to all of a sudden see, this market, it's a streaming package, right? And NESN has a streaming package. It's New England Sports Network. So you're going to be able to get the games on streaming. MSG in New York, they have a streaming package. But maybe in Colorado and in Nevada, it's okay, some of the games are on broadcast TV with this person. Some of them are on Amazon. It's going to be really fragmented, which I think is actually going to be pretty bad for fans in the short run. But I do think in the long run, this is all going to come to level. We're having a bit of a reckoning in some of this media rights money and some of the sports networks. And it's all, all this streaming money that was being spent on Paramount Plus and Disney Plus and Fubo and DAZN and all these places. They've lost enough money now. We're having a real reckoning there in the media business, and it's going to come eventually swing back towards consumers. I think we're actually on that swing right now. People who are, the meme that you would see on social is how many, I got 12 different streaming services. Can someone just bundle these and put me on cable again? Yeah, that is happening. Trust me, that is happening, and we are swinging back that way.
So any impact in Europe or in England with the Sky Sports deal and the Premiership? Because that's a significant deal that was just wrapped up.
That is a significant deal. They have it a little bit better over there, where the broadcast is a little bit more robust there, and Sky Sports has a stranglehold over there. So that I think is maybe not a bellwether for North America. Okay. It's a smaller. It's the UK is small and relative to the US, bigger than Canada, obviously, and also geographically, it's not as large. So there's just not as much of the kind of regionality. All the EPL teams are all in the same area, whereas you're so spread out from time zone to geography in Canada and the US that it does present a slightly different challenge.
And my last one for you, I'm old enough to remember when podcasts were a thing, but they weren't really populated by recognizable names and things like that. And, why would a media person leave media, traditional over-the-air media to go to a podcast? Boy, are things about to swing back the other way. Just a thought on the potential of Pat McAfee landing at ESPN and what the repercussions of that is.
Yeah, it is. So to bring people up to speed, so Pat McAfee, right, quite famously, I think he was in the All-Star game his last year, actually, as a punter. Retired probably prematurely from the NFL. Some people would say because he had a disagreement with the GM of the Colts at the time, but he was a great punter in the NFL. Pretty immediately got into the media business. He started doing some stand-up comedy and telling stories about, Peyton Manning. He was quickly hired by Barstool Sports, had a successful podcast there, had a bit of a falling out with Barstool, went and decided to do his own show, the Pat McAfee Show. Really is a podcast, but podcast doesn't quite capture what it was. It was online video on YouTube. He's had about 5 or 6 different jobs since then. He did a deal with DAZN at one point. He had a deal with WWE. I don't know if that still exists. He was doing, I think, something with ESPN's College Game Day. So he's had kind of all these different media careers, but the big news was that a year and a half or so ago, he signed a $100 million+ deal with FanDuel. FanDuel is going to title sponsor and pump a lot of money into his podcast, and he's built this really big following, probably one of the top 2 or 3 largest sports podcasts in the world, just behind something like Part of My Take or the Bill Simmons Show for The Ringer and for Barstool, respectively. Rumors are that he is unhappy with the FanDuel deal. I don't think unhappy with FanDuel as a company or the deal per se. I don't think anyone's unhappy with $100 million, but he's an owner-operator. He's running the business. He's actually running a production company. He's running production. And he is, if anybody's watched McAfee, a great talent. He's electric on the mic. He's great he's intelligent about football, both college and NFL. And I think that he's probably realized his skill set is best to be on mic and on camera, as opposed to dealing with the operation of a media company where now he's got, dozens of staff and a studio, et cetera, et cetera. So rumors are that he might be joining ESPN. Disney has their upfront period, which is the big sales period, next week in New York. Could it be announced by next week? I would, maybe if I was a betting man, which I am, put a little bit of money on that on FanDuel Sportsbook. But beyond, and that's an interesting kind of story, Rob, of a guy who, when he finished in the NFL, there's no way he would have got a traditional desk job. He would not have gotten a job on a traditional ESPN show. Went out, did it on his own, built a big podcast network, built a giant following, so big that it couldn't be ignored, that FanDuel cut him a $120 million check. And then all of a sudden, ESPN, who just laid off about 7,000 people, a lot of on-air staff, a lot of kind of quote-unquote legacy on-air staff that were not necessarily bringing in the audience, but being in the ESPN machine for a long time, they have a desire to get younger. They have a desire to reach that, new online first fan base. And Pat might go do the whole cycle and go from digital all the way back to the linear network. But I don't think that we'll ever see, and I don't think we're ever going to get a new just linear show launched. In today's day and age, in 2023, nobody does a deal that's just online or just podcast anymore. If you have a podcast, you're looking to syndicate it onto a television or radio station. If you have a TV or radio show, you're syndicating it online and doing digital. And I think the walls have been totally broken down between online, offline, digital, TV. It truly doesn't even matter anymore. It is just content. And I think that good content creators, people in the sports space, are generally platform agnostic. We know that fans are in different places. So we want to be in those places. And maybe it's on TikTok in short form, and it's on Twitter and written in some clips, and it's on YouTube, and it's also on TV, and it's on your sports betting app, and it's in 10 different places. But I do think that the modern media mix is a little bit of everything everywhere, as opposed to we're a TV show and then maybe you can watch it on tape delay.
And he would get the Stephen A. Smith treatment, right? Like, he'd get the show, but he'd also be put on their other properties at big times. And
someone asked me the other day, said, why would, someone texted me and said, why would Pat McAfee walk away from this FanDuel deal? Like, on paper, he's getting $120 million overhead for his studio, and he's got, 10, 12 staff. Can't be very much. He must be putting a lot of money in his jeans, and he probably is. But there is something quite magical about, hey, we're going to be broadcasting the Super Bowl. How would you like to be part of a Super Bowl broadcast? We have Monday Night Football. How would you like to be on Monday Night Football every week as an analyst? There is still something about the mothership, about ESPN, that is really appealing, especially for someone like Pat, who grew up in kind of peak TV era where ESPN and Dan Patrick, and it was where SportsCenter is. Same with someone like myself, who traditional media still has that kind of place in your heart, and I think that there's a good chance Disney could probably pay him less than he's making right now, and give him an opportunity to be in the Super Bowl broadcast on Monday Night Football. Give him that Stephen A. treatment where he is, front and center on talk shows, but also in broadcast, and also give him probably about $10 million a year in salary, which is not too hard to swallow.
Late night for him, do you think? Could he be on could he be ABC's plan for a late night?
Wow, that is an interesting question. I would actually love to see that. The last sports person who tried late night was Bill Simmons on HBO, which was a total flop.
Yeah,
Before
but Craig Kilborn was good.
Yeah,
but Craig Kilborn
was good. Craig Kilborn was definitely good. And before that, there's been a couple other attempts. I'm trying to think of kind of.
Well, John McEnroe had a show on CNBC.
McEnroe's had a show, and Barkley's doing a show on CNN now, apparently too, where he's going to go to do a news show. So listen, I think McAfee on late night honestly could probably work if he had the stomach for it. I would actually be interested to see that, Rob. That's an interesting idea I hadn't considered.
Listen, this was so much fun. I appreciate you doing this, Adam. I love these check-ins because it's a passion for me, and nobody does it better than you. So I really appreciate you making some time for us today.
Anytime, Rob. Take care.
Thanks, buddy. There you go. Adam Seaborn, as he mentioned, from Playmaker Capital, which is the owner of the Nation Network, and we're very proud to be part of this. He's their sports media analyst, and if you're like me and you like the inside baseball, he's the guy to follow. Speaking of baseball, we're going to get to that in a second. By the way, Adam and our next guest, both brought to you by Ski Cellar Snowboard. SkiCellarSnowboard.com, 76 years in Calgary. Now, ski weather? No. Snowboarding weather? No. A little, cool outside, which kind of maybe gets you thinking, is there still good deals on warm weather? Yes, there is. On things that are waterproof? Yes, there is. So make sure you check out their 3 locations, Ski Cellar Snowboard, skicellarsnowboard.com. Coming up later on this week, Danny Austin will join us on Friday. The Stampeders and the CFL are kicking off the preseason training camps. So Danny's going to check in with us on Friday. Next Monday, Colin Patterson, Ryan Pike, and next Wednesday, Danny Austin hosts. Danny Austin will be your host. Peter Marr will be on that show. So, and then coming up not too long from now, Craig Button, Mike Rogers. So we got some great guests, lots of hockey coming, but wanted to take this opportunity before the season gets too far down the road to check in on some baseball. Of course, well, we can't show you because it's over here, but Mike Soroka, the Calgary kids, having great success, I believe, down in AAA right now for Atlanta. We're all kind of waiting until he gets called up. But all eyes in this country obviously swing to the Blue Jays. Our next guest brought to you by Ski Cellar Snowboard, skicellarsnowboard.com. Pleasure for us to say hello and welcome in for the first time Cam Lewis from Blue Jays Nation. And we can also find him at Oilers Nation. But Cam, kind enough to spend some time with us to talk about the Jays. Mr. Lewis, how do we find you today?
I'm great, Rob. Thanks for having me. How are you?
I'm good, but I almost feel like I'm a month late on this conversation. I do usually like to set the table a little bit for a Blue Jays team that, again, comes in with a great deal of expectation, again, comes in with an active offseason, and again, I would have said, comes in with questions in the starting rotation. Here we are. 6 weeks in, playing Philadelphia again tonight, coming off an 8-4 loss last night. How do we assess the Jays season so far?
I think it's been positive. And to be honest with you, there's some anxiety that things aren't going as well as they should be, largely because of the starts you've seen from other teams. The reality is, as good as, and it's not, blowing the wheels off the door here, 21-15 the Toronto Blue Jays are, but you have Tampa Bay, the Rays, sitting at 29-8. You have Baltimore, the Orioles, a team that didn't make the playoffs last year, at 23-13. I think it was, the last time I saw it, it was the top 4 teams in the American League East were the top 6 teams in Major League Baseball as well. So as well as the Jays have been doing, and it's been solid, there's been so many other teams doing so well that it kind of gets in the way of feeling good about that early success, unfortunately.
Let's talk a little bit about the early success. Alex Manoah, I'm not sure we put in that category, but Kikuchi, we would. I'm not sure anybody saw his start.
Yeah, that's the interesting thing about the Jays is the starting pitching. You've been getting really quality stuff from Chris Bassett, who didn't necessarily endear himself to fans with his first start against the St. Louis Cardinals. It was a bit of a mess, and there was quite a bit of anxiety about how he would do with the pitch clock, how he would do throwing his huge arsenal of pitches at new catchers. And then Yusei Kikuchi, too. As we know, last year it was really difficult for him. And Jose Barrios, very challenging season last year, but those 3 guys have been solid so far. Meanwhile, the ace, Alek Manoah, that's who everybody thought was going to be carrying this rotation, and he really hasn't found his groove yet. The velocity's down, and maybe there's some reason to worry. Has this young pitcher thrown too many innings at this point in his career?
Well, for an old person like me, no, because nobody throws too much anymore. But I get the point. Let's stick with Kikuchi just for a second. Structurally, fundamentally, mechanically, anything that jumps off the page at you about him this year?
I think it's really between the ears, to be totally honest with you. The bizarre thing about watching Kikuchi last year, and I think most observers shared this sentiment, is it was stunning to see somebody with such good stuff, specifically a left-handed fastball in the mid to high 90s, struggle so much. And it seemed like every bad start that compounded. He came out the next time and was trying too hard, trying to compensate. And the exact opposite that we're seeing with some pitchers is that it looks like he might be having a good time now with the pitch clock. It seems like it's just allowing him now to just kind of come out and throw the ball, play catch with the catcher, let your stuff do the work. Don't overthink it. Don't get too much in your head. That's really what it seems like, because the stuff's always been there. He's been a successful Major League Baseball pitcher before. It just wasn't there last season.
What you mentioned it a couple of times. Let's talk about some of the changes, innovations for baseball. Here we are again, six weeks in. Is the pitch clock still a thing, or have we moved past it yet?
It feels like it's been entrenched in baseball now. It really feels like the shock wasn't as extreme as maybe it seemed like it would have been when we were talking about these rules changing in January, February, at the start of spring training. It seemed like it was going to be this huge, massive shock, but honestly, it's felt pretty positive. I'd say from the perspective of, and I'm only a 30-year-old guy, so I'm not necessarily an old school guy, but I do like old school baseball. I like the National League. I like the pitchers batting. I haven't loved all of these changes per se, but I understand why Major League Baseball is doing them, because you want to make the sport more watchable for those who are kind of half in, half out. And it's probably a bit easier now to justify to a friend or a colleague or whoever you're taking to watch a ball game. All right, this is going to move by quickly. It's going to be over in 2.5 hours. There isn't going to be a whole bunch of time between pitches. There's going to be consistency to the action. I think it's been positive. I'd say you have some instances where it kind of maybe takes away from the drama at the end of the game, maybe just a little bit, but all in all, it's sped up the pace.
I can see that, but I was, kind of impressed. There was a doubleheader here recently that was done in shorter. Both games were done quicker than a 10 or a 9-inning game that the two teams played the year before. So you are starting to see some of that, right? So having said that, and knowing the nature of baseball and sports, what are people bitching about now? If they're not bitching about that, what have they moved on to?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, I think there's still some frustration with the whole thing, because everybody wants to see the strikeouts go down. Everybody wants to see the ball in play. You want to see the action. You want to see somebody smack a frozen rope into the outfield and then advance from first to third. And there's intensity, there's action, there's a play at the plate, a play at third base. That's what people want, but it's hard to force that. We're in a new era of baseball now where every team has 10, 15 guys in their system throwing 100 miles an hour. And you can load up a bullpen with all these guys with excellent arms, and there's going to be a whole bunch of strikeouts. And there's also so many hitters who their managers say, look, the analytics are telling you, sit back and wait for your pitch and hit a dinger. Even if you strike out, you're a true outcomes player. Swing the bat, take a walk, or strike out, one of the three. So that's the one thing I think a lot of people at Major League Baseball would have liked to maybe see changed more, but I'm not really sure you can force that.
And they did outlaw the shift?
They did outlaw the shift.
Yeah, okay. Correct, so we should throw that in there too. I mean, that's pretty significant, rule changes for any major sport, right? In 1 year. Usually the NFL tweaks with a little thing. This was a fairly significant. Have we noticed an uptick? Are we seeing bigger crowds? Are we seeing bigger numbers on television? Even what work that you do you see more interest because the game has made those changes?
I don't know if it's been interest per se in the numbers, because I don't know if it's been a large enough sample size just
True.
yet.
That's and the weather, right?
Yeah, it's early in the season. We'll see the best of baseball in. But that being said, I think anecdotally, just myself, I went to opening day in Toronto. I flew from Edmonton with my fiance, and we went with a couple of friends. And there were a couple of friends who weren't really big baseball people, but they were thrilled with the action at the Rogers Centre for opening day. And bear in mind, this also is the changes that Toronto, the Blue Jays, have made to the Rogers Centre to kind of have more things going on. You're more in the action with those outfield little standing areas, drinking social areas. And they said, hey, this is the funnest Jays game I've been to in my life.
Did you go out there? I know you went to Toronto, but did you go out to those areas?
Yeah, some of them I found, for me, they were a little bit too crowded. I don't love a really packed crowd myself, but there's the areas now where they allow fans to get right down in the bullpen where the pitchers are warming up, and it's a blast to get down there and watch. It's really cool. I've been to a handful of Major League Baseball stadiums in my life, and my favorite ones are always the ones that allow fans to get nice and close to really watch the players. You can kind of have a different appreciation for the skill and the ability of the players when you can get down that close. Like when you can see a reliever really throwing 100 miles an hour and what that looks like, it allows you to understand and appreciate baseball a little bit differently, I think.
I think safe to say that I think the general manager, the president, wanted to make a change in the offseason, wanted this team to kind of get away from long ball all the time, wanted to, be able to take steal bases. And again, small sample size, but, 6 weeks in, the fundamentals of this Jays team, are they different than the years past with this core?
They're a very different looking team now than they have been in the past. That's definitely for sure. I mean, the offense is still there, especially when you've had the start that Bo Bichette, Vladimir Guerrero Jr., and Matt Chapman have had. Those are kind of your main three, big right-handed bats in your lineup that are doing the brunt of your damage. But you can see really with how much better the team is defensively, especially in the outfield. You have now that Kevin Kiermaier, Dalton Varsho combination out there. And that's a significant change from last year. You couldn't play George Springer in center field every game. So you're winding up in Raimel Tapia in center field and Lourdes Gurriel in left. And no disrespect to those players, but they're not that good defensively. So if you have some guys on the Jays, some pitchers, say like an Alek Manoah, a guy like that who allows a fair amount of contact, you really need your defense to be on point. And they're not perfect yet. They're pretty still inconsistent, but it's just mid-May. But it's been a pretty big change from years past. The defense and running on the base paths, stuff like that, have been a problem for this Jays team as they kind of move from being that young team with potential to being a true contender. And this is the first time this season that I've really felt, wow, the Jays are good defensively. This is the first time for me.
Well, as you mentioned, three guys that we want to talk about. Let's start with Matt Chapman first. Say what you will about the Jays, they have a knack of going out and getting somebody else's guy that's Springer, whoever, that's leaving and coming in and makes an impact. Year one was okay. Year two was something else.
Yeah, it's it's hard to imagine scripting a better pre-free agency season for a player than what Matt Chapman's put up so far for Toronto. He's got so far through 35 games, a .349 batting average. The OPS is up there at 1.033, 17 doubles already, 5 homers. I'd say for Blue Jays fans, enjoy the season of Matt Chapman, because I don't know, this might be the same that we saw with Marcus Semien a few years ago. Amazing season, gets a huge bag of cash. That would be my expectation, but he's earning himself an amazing deal here.
Speaking of huge bags of cash, some might say in a kind of a way, Bo Bichette maybe bet on himself a little bit this offseason with his restricted free agency and qualifying offers and everything, leading majors and hits, right? Like, I mean, he's come into his own, right? We can say that about Bo Bichette now.
Yeah, he's it feels like just recently, it was a few weeks ago that he picked up his 500th career hit as a Blue Jay, and he became the fastest ever to do so. The fastest previously were Shannon Stewart and Vernon Wells. They reached it in the same amount of games, and Bo Bichette cleared them like pretty easily, and it's shocking because those were two really good players. A young Vernon Wells was fantastic. Shannon Stewart was a great hitter. Bo's already got 529 hits for his career over 429 games. Like, if this guy sticks around, then we're talking about somebody who could wind up being the all-time leading Toronto Blue Jays hitter, which is really something. But like you said, he inked the 3-year contract to avoid the arbitrations that walk him to free agency, but it's hard to say whether he's going to stick around long term or whether the team's going to back up the cash for him. They've locked a few guys up. They've been willing to do the free agency deals with, like, Springer, Kevin Gausman. They locked up Jose Barrios, but still weirdly quiet about Bo and Vlad and their long-term deals.
Well, but they're not the same conversation, Bo and Vlad, right? Like, we would agree on that. They're good young hitters and they're dynamic and they're a lot, but they're not the same conversation.
No, they're really different players. And I mean, I think for the Jays, you kind of have to pick who's the face of your franchise, who's the one you really want to have around forever. It's hard to say if it's going to be both. You look around and it's not every single team locks up their great young players. Like the Yankees, of course, just signed Aaron Judge to his huge deal, but look at the LA Dodgers. They let it would have been crazy to tell somebody 5 years ago that both Cody Bellinger and Corey Seager were allowed to walk by the LA Dodgers in free agency. And that's what happened. And Gavin's just saying in the back end here in our chat, Gavin, the producer, that the Yankees barely kept Judge around. There was a whole bunch of talk that he's going to sign a deal with the San Francisco Giants, even a report that a deal was made. So it's really hard to predict these kinds of things and what's going to wind up happening.
My gut has always been that it was going to be one of the two, and my gut has always been that you would keep Vladdy and you would let Bo walk. You're evaluating. Here we are talking about his hitting stats, but as a positional player, you could improve that position defensively.
Yeah, that's That's the difficult thing with Bo is we just talked about how good his offense is, and what makes his offense even better is the fact he does it short. So the Corey Seager situation is kind of a similar one where I don't know if LA was comfortable handing out a 10 or a 12 or whatever year deal to a player who maybe looks better at second base. And then if he is at second base, the hitting numbers aren't necessarily quite as impressive. You need your shortstop to be really strong defensively. And I think Bo has made a lot of strides in his game. He's a much better defender now than he was when he came up, which is natural. You know, players get better as they go along, but it's hard to see that he's going to be a plus defender at short at any point in his career. It kind of feels like it's going to be a talking point forever. That he's a bat first player at that position.
Besides the big guns and the guys that are hitting right now, and we talked about Kikuchi, who's quietly here in the start of this season gone about their business and been solid and impressive?
Well, there's a handful of interesting players who have contributed to the Jays in a depth role. I don't know if Kevin Kiermaier has necessarily been quiet. I think he's really,
fair enough.
Yeah, really quickly endeared himself to the fans. I've heard this comment made tons of times. Everyone says it's shocking that he's only been here for a few months because it feels like he's been a Blue Jay forever. Feels like he's been here for years. And then you have someone like Whit Merrifield they acquired at the trade deadline last year, and there was virtually zero excitement about that. People were saying this isn't really the trade deadline we were looking for. Whit Merrifield, he's washed up. But then he goes and gets on base. What was it, like the first 30 games of the season, consecutive streak of being on base every single game. And the lineup right now is a little bit thinner than it has been in the past. It's not the 2015 Jays. It's not the 2021 Jays. There isn't, 9 guys in your lineup where you're thinking this guy can hit 15 home runs anymore. And to have a guy like Merrifield who's getting on base every single game so that your Bows and Vlads and Chapman can drive you in, that's huge. That's what they need from those bottom of the order guys. And he's not going to keep it up all year, but if they can just kind of rotate hot streaks at the bottom of that order, then they'll do well.
Cavan Biggio. At one point, it was these guys are coming. Bichette, Biggio, Guerrero. There's all these sons of these incredible major leaguers. Somehow, Cavan has kind of fallen behind. Is this kind of not the end of the road? I hate to say that, but could he be moved at some point? Would he stay anymore? Do they still have long range plans for him?
Yeah, Biggio's a tough one because he kind of got thrown into that mix with the other two. And I mean, Bo and Vlad the whole way up where Vladdy was the number one prospect in baseball for a while. Bo was right there too. He had some amazing results in the minors after being drafted out of high school. He was always up there as a top prospect. Whereas Biggio, he played well in the minor leagues, but it was a different situation because he was a 4-year college senior coming out of his draft. So the upside wasn't as significant, but he did kind of get lumped in with the group. And to his credit, he came up and he was really quite good for the Jays in 2019 and 2020 in the shortened year. And they've really tried to kind of find a role for him where he bounces around the field. He's supposed to be the left-handed bat that's not afraid to take a walk, have, a long at bat, that kind of thing. But the batting just really hasn't been there. He's at a 143 batting average this season through 20 games, 200 on base percentage. And he's getting closer and closer to free agency. So when you go through arbitration, you can earn some more money. The Jays might decide, hey, look, we've got some young guys who are league minimum, dirt cheap. We'd like to give him a shot. Cavan, we wish you all the best. It wouldn't be surprising to see that in the next year or so.
Yeah. And then, to a certain extent, I think you're right. I think he kind of got a raw end of the deal by being lumped in with those other guys, right? Because they, superstars. Yeah. Let's talk. We talked about Kikuchi. We talked a little bit about, pitching in general. But what are you seeing from this group? I know a lot of work in the last couple of years has been trying in that bullpen to get the right mix. How comfortable are you with this rotation? How comfortable are you with this bullpen right now?
Better than I've felt in the past. The bullpen's been a huge issue for the Jays for a couple of years. I honestly really didn't think it was that much of an issue last year going down the stretch, but then you get into that playoff game and you saw what happened and how quickly it came unglued and you're, wow, maybe it wasn't a good bullpen this whole time. It feels like it's better now. I think actually now that I think about it, a good answer to your previous question about who's kind of been low key really good is the reliever they grabbed from Seattle in the Teoscar Hernandez trade, Eric Swanson. And this was not a popular trade at the time. Teoscar's was a really well-liked Blue Jay, as we all saw when the Mariners came to town. He got a huge applause. He got a big applause even when he hit a home run against the Jays. But Eric Swanson's been fantastic. 17 2/3 inning, 1.53 ERA, 11.7 strikeouts per 9 innings. He's been, I mean, you could even make the argument he's been their number one reliever, even better than Jordan Romano, which is really saying something because Romano's turned into a very reliable closer at the back of the bullpen. So I think the back of the bullpen looks great. The key is getting there. The key is going to be those 6th and 7th innings. There's some names there in the mix. Maybe it's, Nate Pearson. Maybe it's another prospect who comes up, Ricky Tiedemann. Who knows? But there are arms back there better than in previous years, I'd say.
So Tiedemann's hurt though, right? And for the next couple, what is Pearson's status right now?
Pearson right now is up at the big league club. He's only tossed 5 2/3 innings with the major league team this year, but he's been quite good. He's only allowed 1 run. He had a really good outing in Boston in that terrible series they had with the Red Sox. Yeah, where they got swept, and he was one of the few positives. He tossed 2 scoreless frames in relief in one of the games that might have been Barrios. Somebody only went like 4 or 5 innings, and he looked really good. He looked more competent than we've seen in the past, because I feel like with that guy, obviously the stuff is there. He can throw 101, 102 miles an hour, but so much time injured, so much time missed that he could have been pitching, that I think all of that really gets in your head, and there's a lot of pressure to kind of live up to your status as this great prospect. But I think now that he's in the bullpen and the roles and the expectations have shifted a little bit, I think that might make things a little bit more easy for him.
Well, I would hope so, because the flip side is there is opportunity here. He does not have the wear and tear in the joints that that a pitcher his age would just naturally would have, right? You'd have to think that, if he can stay healthy in the other parts, that he's still got some tread on the tires.
Yeah, and that's the thing. I mentioned this about, it's kind of funny that Alek Manoah is 1 year younger than Nate Pearson, because Alek Manoah feels like he's been around forever. He's already pitched.
He does, yeah.
He's got to be getting close to 500 innings in the big leagues by now, and I wonder, like, it came on really fast, and you get that dead arm. It's a thing that happens. So yeah, with a guy like Nate Pearson, there's hardly any innings under his belt, so he's got a lot of bullets, and hopefully the Jays can utilize that, and he can become a good multi-inning reliever. We've talked forever since the Shapiro regime came over from Cleveland that the Jays one day are going to have their Andrew Miller reliever. We all saw it in 2016 with Cleveland. They had that reliever who could go pick up 5, 6, 7 outs in the middle of the game. Nate Pearson used to be a starter. Maybe he can finally be that guy.
Well, I mean, it's not unprecedented, right? It's the story that's been told before. Leaving this team and just looking around, I mean, Tampa Bay is Tampa Bay. It's black magic. I don't understand it. I don't even know where you begin. But to be this close to June and only have single-digit losses is insane. At what point? It's May, but at what point do you start having the conversation? Well, I guess we're in for a wild card spot.
Yeah, honestly, it's really frustrating to be a fan of a team in this division. And the funniest thing about it is this might be the best AL East we've ever seen, and the New York Yankees are in 5th.
Yeah.
The Red Sox are in 4th. Those are the teams, like, you'd expect it to be upside down. The Yankees in 1st, Boston 2nd, Jays in 3rd. But I have no idea what Tampa Bay's got going on. Like, they've always been a solid team, great depth. Yeah, great pitching. They have that incredible depth. But to see what they're doing now is just insane, though. And it's going to be a challenge because we don't have the same strength of schedule as we did in the past. It's not, the American League East teams are all going to play each other 19, 20 times. It's only a handful of series now because of the balanced schedule. So the Jays don't have a whole bunch of games left against Tampa to make up this ground. There's only a few series. So at some point it's going to be, a couple weeks away from June. Tampa's already 7.5 games up on the Jays, and the Jays haven't even been bad, but
no,
maybe that's just the way it is. It was like that last year with the Yankees too. They had that historically good 2 months, and then we're kind of meh. But even with being mad, no one could catch them. Yeah.
Is there a style that it's early, but the Jays seem to be a little streaky, right? Win 6 in a row, going to Boston, lose, then they win 3 against Pittsburgh, that type of thing. Is there a style of team that's giving them trouble? Are they, or is it teams with multiple lefties? Is there anything that's you're picking up early on that seems to be tripping this team up?
Yeah, the thing that stood out with the series in Boston is it seemed like they were really struggling with the cold. That's what I saw a few people mention. I don't know if that's really it. I think the series in Boston, part of why that was so bad came down to, I'd bet that everybody on the Red Sox that played against the Blue Jays last year had that circled on their calendar, because the Jays went 16-3 against Boston last year. And they had a few games there where they just beat the wheels off the Red Sox. I think there was one that was, what was the final score? 29-7 or 6. With the inside the park grand slam. So I'd imagine if you're the Red Sox, you really had that circled and you really wanted to beat the Jays in that series. So that's the worst series I've seen them. The first time where they looked just pretty hapless for the entire series since, the very beginning of the year. But otherwise, it feels like they've been rolling along pretty well. It's not a good game every single day, but more often than not, they put the strong effort forward where they're executing. They're playing strong defensively. It's fine at bats. They get a quality start. It feels like it's more often than not, which is positive.
The last one for you, and that has to do with the manager, not a new manager, but the decision-making, which was for a while there was something that seemed to grab everybody's attention until they made the change and moved on from Charlie. What are we seeing? Are we, is this a well-run, well-managed team at this point?
It's hard to say. It's I feel like we kind of overestimate the role that a manager can have in a game when you're watching from the TV vantage point. Sometimes you think, oh, why didn't he use this reliever in this situation? But you don't necessarily know how that reliever is feeling, how good their arm is at that time. It's not always possible, but there's been some stuff where you kind of wonder if he leans into using certain guys too much, a little bit too much trust with certain guys and not enough trust in other guys. There were a lot of valid gripes last year during the playoff series when they blew that game, though. I mean, the microscope is so extreme for a game like that, and so many things went wrong. But I don't know. It's hard to say. It feels like they're in better hands than they were with Charlie Montoya. It feels like, and I don't want to be critical of Charlie. I think he was good for the Jays at that time. They needed
him.
Yeah. They needed somebody who was able to deal with younger players, make it a calm environment for them to come up and learn the big leagues. And now they have somebody who's more, and you also mix in, of course, having Don Mattingly on the bench as well, a guy who's been around forever. You have a little bit more of a rigid style, which I think is going to be good for a team like this. It felt last year like they kind of lost their focus at times, and you wonder if that's what happened when they had that horrible loss in the playoffs. Was your mind drifting? Were you focused? Were you ready for this? And it feels like that's different now.
Good stuff, Cam. This was great. I'm hoping you'll agree to come back on. I'd love to continue the conversation as the season goes on. We can find you at Blue Jays Nation. We can find you at Oilers Nation. We can also find you as a contributor at Daily Faceoff. So thanks for doing this. It was a lot of fun.
Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
Okay, we'll talk soon. Cam Lewis, everybody. Told you. You can read them over at Jays Nation. I like doing that conversation. There was lots of baseball fans around. And quite honestly, you don't need this podcast to cover the Jays because I think we got 2 or 3 of them. But it's for me, it's good. I like to keep my fingers in what's going on over there. They're in the Jays now I'm speaking of are in this kind of position cycle spot, if you will, of are they or aren't they? They've got the good young talent. We have this conversation. We have this conversation with the Flames all the time. Is this the core? What core? I think with Guerrero, Bichette, Kirk, Springer, Chapman, Manoah, when he's going, Barros, this is a core, and there's an expectation. And then of course the Tampa Bay Rays come and run away from you, but we'll see. Toronto got them early on. By the way, new episode of Blue Jays Radio after each series. So that's how they operate over there. They're not silly like us. They do it in a methodical way. After every series, there is a new episode of Blue Jays Radio. Of course, Cam, brought to you by the Ski Cellar Snowboard, skicellarsnowboard.com, 76 years in Calgary. Hey, if you're a hockey player, check out their snow skating. You can go online. You can Google it, snow skating. It's a thing. And it's a thing at Ski Cellar Snowboard that you should go and find out a little bit more. Yeah, maybe not right now, but for next fall, next winter, you might want to get on it, skicellarsnowboard.com. Didn't get a big chance off the top, so why don't we take a moment and go back and review a couple of the last days in hockey before we get to the playoffs. When last we spoke, it was Connor Bedard Day, and we were all excited about the fact that the Calgary Flames could win the draft, move from 16 to 6, and then have 5 teams pass on Connor Bedard. That's not going to happen. Now it would be 15 teams would have to pass on Connor Bedard. The Flames stayed where they were most likely going to stay, with just over 1% chance of moving. 16th, they will draft 16th. We had Ryan Pike on earlier in the week, and quite comfortable that they can get a good player. And, I already told you, I'm useless when it comes to making predictions. Defenseman, who knows? Probably not a goalie, but you never know. Forward, yeah, likely. What do they need in the organization? If I was king of the world, I think you want a stud defenseman. Now with Valimaki out, Shillington coming back, Poirier. So anyway, here's a mock draft from Stephen Ellis. He's got Andrew Cristal coming to Calgary at 16, Connor Bedard going to Chicago, and Adam Fantilli going to the Ducks. Interesting that the Ducks find themselves in second again. They went right toe-to-toe with Pittsburgh way back in 05 for Sidney Crosby, and the ball ended up in favor of the Penguins, as we know, and Bobby Ryan went to the Ducks. Here's another opportunity, and you're a runner-up. 25% chance too. The Blue Jackets, those were the odds going in there. And, this is what he could look like. Yes, I like that picture. If you're a Hawks fan, you got to love that picture. People in the Tinfoil Hat Brigade, the hockey edition, the hockey department, very upset that they feel that Chicago was given a gift. I believe if you really want to know what happened, Frank Seravalli was among a handful of reporters given access to the entire process, and he wrote about it at Daily Faceoff. If you want to read the behind the scenes, I will go back, and I can't remember if it was Peter Marr or somebody we were having a conversation with, but I'm a little surprised that Chicago and Jonathan Toews separated. They moved on from Jonathan Toews. I think Toews may not play next year. Could, but may not. But they had the final game, and I believe he scored, and they gave him the big send-off. It sure seems to me that for 1 year, if you're going to have Connor Bedard, I'd like to have somebody like Jonathan Toews. And having said that, the Blackhawks have oodles and oodles of cap room, so they can go get a vet. They can go get somebody. When Dion Phaneuf was here, they asked him who he liked to watch, and they said Brian Marchment, and the Flames went out and got Brian Marchment, and he played with Phaneuf for a while. You can do that, especially in the Chicago's case when they have that much cap room. So we'll see. It's a fait accompli that he'll go to Chicago. So much in the same way like Edmonton had, Gretzky, Messier, and now they've got, Connor McDavid and Draisaitl. Chicago goes from Kane and Toews, and now they're going to have, Connor Bedard, and who knows? They've got lots of draft picks. They've got, young kids. No reason to think that they can't, find more supporting cast. So anyway, Chicago wins Connor Bedard Day. The draft coming up in June. 2 games in the National Hockey League tonight. Let's take a look at them before we wrap it up today. The one which will start first is in Florida with the Toronto Maple Leafs down 3-0 in Florida against the Panthers. We were talking earlier with Adam Seaborn, our sports media analyst. Not only is this heartbreak for fans, it will be a tremendous heartbreak for Rogers, as the Maple Leafs have been very good for business, very good for ratings. Looks like Wall will get the start. Samsonov not available. But the story du jour is the fact that Matt Murray is healthy. The former 2-time Stanley Cup champion with the Pittsburgh Penguins is healthy, but they choose to go with the rookie Wall in this case. A lot was made about the acquisition and the goaltending that the Maple Leafs did at the beginning of the year. You got to think that Dubas, whether he shouldn't, or whatever, it feels it's too trite to say, "Wow, he's going to be gone after this," because it's a guy's life. It's a human being. But they gambled on the goaltending. I wouldn't say the goaltending cost them. They're top guys. I think we got a graphic about this, but the Marners and the Nylanders and the Matthews, round 1, look at that. 34 points, 22 even strength points. And now look at this. Oh, Tavares is in there too. So Matthews, Marner, Tavares, and Nylander, no goals through 3 games, 4 points. We can talk about the goaltending till the cows come home, but something tells me you're going to have to break up that group too. In a league with not a lot of cap room. The Edmonton Oilers at home tonight, trailing in their series to the Golden Knights, 2-1. Laurent Brossoit, the former Flames draft pick, never played for the Flames, but has been a very serviceable backup, was your starter in this series. And then he's out, and Aiden Hill comes in. Aiden Hill gets the win. Hard for me to believe that the 2 generational offensive talents in the league right now, in McDavid and Draisaitl, are going to be kept at bay by the 3rd and 4th goaltenders in Vegas's depth chart. But here we are. Vegas is well structured. They've got good players. They're well coached. There's a lot of reasons to like them. They've got semi superstar power in Eichel and Stone and the likes. I won't lie to you. I was a little bit shocked by the result in Game 3, but that seems to be the MO right now. I mean, Dallas scored 6 on Seattle in Seattle last night, and Carolina scored 6 on Jersey in Jersey. The only series that has been tight from start to finish has been Toronto, and by tight I mean 2 goals or less. I fully expect Edmonton to bounce back tonight. I still think they're the best team in the NHL at this juncture, taking nothing away from Florida or Seattle or anybody else. But again, before these games, before the second round started, I was talking about, hey, it hasn't been since '89 that 2 Canadian teams clashed in a Stanley Cup final. So it's my fault. I should have never brought that up. But I am very curious about Edmonton and how they respond tonight. And I know we all expect and we'll look at Draisaitl and McDavid and go forth and do, and they will, but it's the other performers. The rising tides raises all ships concept. There's a lot of guys in that organization that have been hyped up and talked about and written about when there's wins. But it seems to be just the 2 guys when there's losses. And now, you expect the big guns to, take off and roll with it. Gaffer pointed out, Ryan Nugent-Hopkins still scoreless. So we'll see. I think that series could be going on for a while. I think Dallas, I don't know. I watched Seattle. I don't get it. I mean, I've watched enough hockey. I understand it, but I don't get it. Like I look at Seattle. Okay. They remind me of more of an offensively skilled Minnesota Wild team from 2003. And anybody that remembers that team is rolling their eyes because it's not a really good, accurate interpretation of the situation. Dallas, I mean, with Ottinger, we saw him in that series against Calgary last year. That series went to overtime in Game 7. That series probably should have been over in 5. But Ottinger wouldn't die. He wouldn't go away. And at times this year, he's looked like the best goalie in the league. And in this series, he's been leaky. He's been good. That's a story. League-wide, that's a story. Mentioned Vancouver, Vegas. Vegas is now, gone to another because of injury. Toronto because of injury. Jersey's swapped them back and forth. Carolina swapped them back and forth. Lions started for Florida, but now it's Bobrovsky again. Grubauer and Ottinger have not. They've been pulled, and other guys have gotten in. Jones played last night too, but and Skinner came out for a bit in the series against LA, but lots and lots of turmoil in goal. So we'll watch with great interest what happens there. And we already have a team on the cusp in the sense of the Devils heading into Carolina, trailing 3-1, and just do not look like they're in the same class as Carolina. And I said it to Eric last Friday, Eric Dahachuk, I call them killers. And then you get reminded of who's not in the lineup. Tara Vainen, by the way, I believe was skating today for Carolina. But Pacioretty, there's some pretty Svechnikov, I believe, is out. There's some pretty significant missing pieces for that Carolina team, yet they look like killers. They just look like killers. And if Edmonton doesn't come out on the West, if people in Carolina turn off your internet, shut off your computers, I would probably be riding Carolina at this point. But again, we established right off the top of this very podcast that my predictions are bogus. So don't listen to me. Let's go home, shall we? The final mile. Quite a bit to talk about here today. Let's start with something we talked about last show. Fires Up North. I work with a great group of people that support pets and their owners who are underprivileged or in crisis, and clearly they're in crisis. Got a huge donation today from Pet Value. So Parachutes for Pets is able to support people up north, and I guess we're bringing people and resettling them here in the meantime. It is unbelievable how dry it is in the forests up north. We haven't really even gotten into lightning yet. A lot of this is man-caused. We could be in for, if we don't get a lot of rain, saying that in Calgary, so I think rain the last 4 or 5 days, but I'm talking about up north where a lot of these really drought conditions, they're deep. The deadwood, the tinder on the ground is dry. It's just ripe for big fires, and we're seeing that. So if you can help, Parachutes for Pets, who are helping the people who are being relocated, and I believe on the weekend, the number we threw out on Monday was there were over 1,000 plus pets that had been, taken out of their homes with their families, and they needed help in the shelters and stuff like that. So that part is, and again, we just need to be, good neighbors. We just need to help. There's going to be lots of cause to help this year. So I certainly want to make note of that. And finally, I want to leave you with just a constant reminder. I am going to beat this into everybody's head. The power of sport, the importance of sport, the importance of inclusion, the importance that everybody should have a crack at being on a team, no matter what differences or difficulties or challenges they have. Sport is the great equalizer. Sport is the great teacher. And we all have we should all have an equal opportunity to play. I speak openly and proudly of the greatest thing that I've ever been involved with, which is the Superheroes program, which allows players with cognitive and physical challenges to participate in hockey. Today, I was invited by my young friend Jace, who is a fifth-year superhero player. He's out in Chestermere, and through hockey and through playing, he's become somewhat confident and able, and he volunteers. And Jace volunteers for the Chestermere Fire Department as part of the emergency services out there. And he invited me out to the open house, and I got to see Jace, and he toured me around. He volunteers there a couple hours every week and helps the firefighters, and he's just giving back to his community. So Jace brought me out, and he showed me the hose, and this was terrific. And I want to thank him and his mom for the invitation. Not only are they participating in sport, but they're giving back. And then kind of this past weekend, we had our first, thanks to the Calgary Flames alumni, we had our first ever Superheroes banquet. So all three teams stepped up. And speaking of fifth-year players, Samantha spoke to the crowd, and she went up, she wrote a speech, and she thanked all the volunteers, and she thanked all of her coaches, and she just was a handful of young people that came up and spoke. But again, to see the confidence in this young girl, to watch her for 5 years and know that sport has played a role in that. She's a swimmer. She competes in Special Olympics. She loves hockey. She loves the Mount Royal University Cougars and is really excited they won a women's national championship. But again, 6 years ago, kind of on the outside looking in. So just the power of sport. Yes, we can be angry at the Flames, and yes, we can be angry at the Toronto Maple Leafs, and we can live and die with the results of the Edmonton Oilers, and the Blue Jays may break our hearts. And at that level, absolutely. But never, ever forget how important being active and being part of a team and being given the opportunity to be part of a team is. So again, kudos to Kevin Hodgson and the Heroes program for putting that program on. Kudos to Kids Sport and the Calgary Flames Sports Bank for doing what they do, and the Flames Foundation and everybody else, the Cavalry, the Surge, the universities, the Canucks. We have a great community. We have Olympic athletes. Are we perfect? Nope, we're not. Can we be better? Yep, we can, but we've got the will here. And we've got a very special story we're going to share on Friday, about the Special Olympics too. So we're going to give that a little bit of time. As I mentioned, Danny Austin will join us on Friday. Next Monday, Colin Patterson in studio from the Flames alumni, as well as Ryan Pike, the latest on the NHL playoffs and the Flames. Next Wednesday, I won't be here, but Danny Austin will be hosting, and he's got Peter Marr on the show. And a week from Friday, how about this double-decker of hockey goodness? Our old friend, I'm trying to remember the last time that Craig Button and I did an interview together. It's got to be going on 15 years. He's going to join us. Craig Button's going to join us, and Eric DeHatchuk will join us. Gavin, thank you so much for all your help today. Mark Prince came in and saved the show. You'll never know about it, but he's God's gift to producing, and we thank him for that. But it's you guys, once again, that I want to tip my hat to. It's always a pleasure to work for such a great crew. If you enjoyed the podcast, make sure you rate it, share it, and come back again. We'll be here on Friday. Have a great day, everybody.
When there's two sides to every coin, then there's a conversation you can join. But I'm an old dog and there's new tricks, and some of my opinions you just can't fix. 'Cause I'm an old man yelling at the sky. I'ma shake my fist at the clouds and cry. Get off my lawn, you snowflake, before I have a meltdown, breakdown.